my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping, I dreamed I held you in my arms. When I awoke, dear, I was mistaken, and I hung my head and cried. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.
It was a cold, blustery February, the day after Valentine's Day, when Mabel Cunningham, wife of John J.J. Cunningham, went into labor to bear their 6th child. A doctor was called to assist Mabel, but after the birth of the 8-pound girl, Mabel was partially paralyzed on her left side. That was Wednesday, February 15th, 1928, at a little farm about 1 mile from Bowden, Alberta, Canada. The new baby was Eileen Dorothy Cunningham. Canadian winters were brutal, with lots of snow. The house the Cunninghams claimed as their home was an old 2-story frame house. None of our modern conveniences were available. There was no electricity nor plumbing. Water was obtained from a wonderful well just a few yards from the back door. This same well provided cooling facilities during the summer for foods such as milk, butter, some meat, and other items. The well had a wooden trap door and a pulley beneath it. Food was lowered to a cooler level in a bucket. There was a big garden in the summer where almost all of their food was grown. The family ate those good fresh vegetables all summer. In late summer, her mother and sister Margaret canned enough vegetables to last the family all winter. Much of their meat was canned too, since they didn't have a freezer. Her dad took some of the meat out west to a meat processor. When it came back, it was cured and could be hung out in the greenery. It kept for months without the help of refrigeration. Milk and cream came from their own cows, and eggs from their chickens in the summer as needed. The whole family enjoyed fried chicken dinner every Sunday. The family also had quite a herd of horses. Family consisted of 3 boys and 3 girls: Jim, Margaret, Jack, Dale, Caddy, and Eileen. All were kept busy. Being the youngest, Eileen considered her jobs were the least strenuous. For example, feeding and watering the chickens and gathering the eggs. She also carried in wood for the stoves, a large range in the kitchen where the cooking was done, along with the pot-bellied stove in the living room. The chimney from this stove went through the large divided kids' room upstairs and gave off heat. Eileen can remember dressing by that chimney pipe, getting too close, and ending up with a burn on her body. Her mother Mabel sewed many of their clothes. In the fall, when the crops were sold, they ordered clothes from the Simpson and Montgomery Ward mail order houses. Her dad also shopped for them from the merchandise store 10 miles away in Olds. Her mother didn't go along on these trips. Eileen thinks she might have been embarrassed by the way J.J. jewed down the Jewish store owner on his prices. The kids attended school in Bowden, a mile from the house. First grade through high school were taught in one building up on the hill. The building consisted of 4 large classrooms, the first, second, and third grades in one room, fourth, fifth, and sixth next door, then upstairs for the upper grades, divided in 2 rooms. Stables were out back for the horses some kids rode to school. The Cunninghams usually walked. In the cold of winter, their dad hitched a team of horses to a large wagon from which he had removed the wheels and replaced them with runners to make a sled. He put plenty of hay in the bed for the littler kids to bury themselves in and keep warm. He bundled them up in scarves and drove them to school. Eileen has a vivid memory of her dad with frost all over his face from these cold rides. Winters seemed very long. The parents made sure their children had warm clothes. Fashion was not a factor, but warmth was. They wore many hand-me-downs. All of them had skates, and sleds were always available. Hockey was definitely a household word. The brothers were all great hockey players. If everyone wasn't playing or watching hockey games, they were skating for enjoyment. When feet got so cold they couldn't stand it, they could duck into a wooden building with a wood stove in the middle. There they could remove their skates, warm their feet, and go back to the ice. Sometimes when they got home on those cold nights, their dad would warm them up with a little homemade chokecherry wine. Oh, they would sleep well. They also had their own skating rink at home, probably dreamed up by the brothers. On a low, fairly level area of ground, they would all stomp the snow hard and flat. Snow supply never seemed to be a problem. Then they would pump and carry buckets of water from their old faithful well to dump on the trampled snow. This would go on for several days until ice was built up thick enough to skate on. Eileen first skated there when she was about 4. Her skates had 2 runners instead of 1. They were supposed to be easier to learn on. They probably were easier to stand up on, but they sure weren't made for skating forward on. Since they didn't have any electricity, their learning tools and entertainment were not related to television, but of course there was no television then anyway. They always had homework in the evening. Books were always checked out from the school library. Reading was a part of everyday life, not because they were told to, but because it was entertainment. Eileen's favorites were White Fang and Call of the Wild and all the Zane Grey books. And she also seems to have had a favorite doll. The Cunninghams had a radio, battery-powered, with a wire that went outside and attached to a high pole as an antenna. JJ listened to all the news. They all listened to hockey games and some other entertainment programs. One of Eileen's personal favorites was a program she could listen to after school called Howie Wing, a Saga of Aviation.
Stand by for Howie Wing, a Saga of Aviation.
Christmas time, the family trimmed the trees with burning candles. For light, they had kerosene lamps and one gas lantern that hung from the ceiling in the dining room or sat on the table where J.J. read his newspaper. Eileen reckons that her father must have been self-taught because although he went through only the 4th grade, he was a very smart man. J.J. farmed 320 acres of land in Canada. Sometimes members of the Blackfoot tribe out of Calgary would stop by, purportedly to water their horses. J.J. would step outside and visit with them, but Mabel would stay inside, although she'd hand bread and cookies out to them through the window. The family didn't have any actual birthday parties. They maybe made a cake and served it with homemade ice cream, but there were never guests or presents. Eileen, however, found an exception to this rule through the propinquity of her birthday to Valentine's Day. The school always had a special party, so Eileen just appropriated the day and considered the Valentine party as her party. Even before she was old enough for school, she could go along to the parties because lower grades could bring siblings or little friends to the celebrations. The only birthday party at home was the year she turned 12 in 1940, when her sister Caddy, who was 16 at the time, planned a sleighing party for her. All Eileen's friends came, and they had a wonderful time. In spring of the following year, when Eileen was 13, J.J. sold the farm and all the horses and cattle and machinery. They rented the upstairs of a friend's big house in town at Bowden and lived there until the school term was out. And then they moved to California, where all her brothers had already moved to play baseball and hockey, to work, and to go to college. Moving to California was a very big change for Eileen. Her mother, father, and brothers lived together in a rented house in Hawthorne. J.J. worked in the shipyards. Eileen enrolled in Hawthorne School's 8th grade. That first year in the California school was a breeze. The Canadian schools were so advanced that the American teacher made Eileen a helper. The other kids in the class didn't mind the special treatment, and she had no trouble making friends. That winter, on December 7, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Eileen says, "I remember walking in town, and it seemed the whole world was silent. There were no people outside, no cars on the street, and everyone was at home. The next day, the United States declared war against Japan, which was the beginning of World War II. Eileen learned about blackouts and food and gas rationing. Her Japanese American friends from school were shipped inland, out of California. That made Eileen very sad. Eileen graduated from 8th grade at Hawthorne, but she didn't like the big school or the city, so her parents let her go to live with her eldest sister, Margaret, during 9th grade. Margaret was living in a teacherage, which is a little one-room house for teachers to live in for a teaching job in Denton, Montana. Eileen rode to high school with a neighbor boy, and being the new girl in town, she received a lot of attention from the boys. Margaret, being older, was like a mother figure to Eileen, so she looked out for her little sis, who did get to go to the dance almost every weekend. Eileen graduated second in her class of 15 students from Denton High School in 1946. She spent that summer back in California with her parents, and then in the fall she enrolled at Montana State University in Missoula. She lived in a dorm on campus and found college very different from high school. She went just 1 year and says she was glad when the year was over. although she collected some pretty fun memories while there, including this song.
Girls, girls, girls of MSU, there's not a gosh darn thing they'll let us do. Every night at 10 they lock the doors. I don't know why in the heck I came here for. But at Christmas time we're homeward bound. We're gonna turn that whole town upside down. We're gonna dance and drink and neck like heck.
Eileen went back to California and worked for an insurance company that summer. Her own brother, Jack, talked her into going on a blind date with a really nice guy whom she liked a lot, not knowing at the time he was her future husband. Eileen had made a commitment to teach a country school that fall in Danvers, Montana. So she left California and went to that little school out in the country, comprised of 8 students in grades 1 to 6. She lived in a small, one-room teacherage like the one Margaret had occupied. It had no electricity, but it did have running water. Eileen has fond memories of it being a really fun year. She had an old car that got her where she needed to go, and the families of her students were very good to her. Years later, she was surprised to learn via national news that one of her best students and an altar boy at her wedding grew up to be a leader of the Montana Free Men, who took exception with federal law and went to prison for his actions. He died in prison. At Christmas time, during Eileen's teaching year, she went to visit her boyfriend, Jack Hotchkiss. She was already very much in love with him, so when he proposed, she said yes. When the teaching contract ended at the end of the school year, Jack drove up to Montana, and there they were married in Denton's St. Anthony Church by Father Paquette.
Always, always, always.
I'll be loving you always with a love that's true, always. When the things you plan need a helping hand, I will understand. Always, always. Days may not be fair, always. That's when I'll be there, always. Not for just an hour, not for just a day, not for just a year, but always. Days may not be fair, always. That's when I'll be there, always. Not for just an hour, not for just a day, and not for just a year, but our way.
Eileen was 20 years old and Jack was 22. After the wedding, they traveled by car to Wyoming for their honeymoon. Their return trip to California was by Greyhound bus. As Eileen says, in perhaps the world's greatest understatement, the next several years were pretty much occupied with having children, 12 in 20 years. She had 3 daughters and 9 sons. The Hotchkisses moved quite a lot during those years, too. The first child, daughter Jacqueline Jean, or Jackie, was born in Linwood, California. Next came Derry Edmond in 1950 in Lewistown, Montana. Next to appear was Dale William, who also arrived in Lewistown, Montana. The third son to come along was Bryce Eugene, who was born in Lander, Wyoming. The tradition of having sons continued as Michael Shane showed up in 1954 in Granada Hills, California. Glenn Patrick arrived in the San Fernando Valley of California, Granada Hills, in 1956. John Bryce Jr., JB, was born in Hamilton, Montana in 1958. Next to arrive was Brett James in 1960 at Long Beach, California. The 8th son was Bradley Earl, who came along in 1961 at Long Beach, too. And then, lo and behold, Jack and Eileen had a second daughter. Eileen Marie was born in 1963 in Long Beach, California. Thomas Lance was born in 1966 at Bellflower, California. And to make the family complete, the third daughter, Heather Ann, arrived in the summer of 1969 in Los Alamitos. This seems the perfect time to give Mother Eileen a tremendous round of applause. The siblings all remember many wonderful Christmases, birthdays, camping trips, first communions, Easters at their grandparents' ranch at Temecula, fabulous times with their cousins, and all the great things that are part of coming from a big family. They adore their mother and miss their father every day, but feel fortunate nevertheless to have had him here all the days that they were growing up and into their adulthoods. When the family had grown to 5 children, tragedy struck. Red measles swept the neighborhood around the Hotchkisses' home in Granada Hills. Little Bryce, who was just 2, caught the measles and they affected him very badly. He started having a hard time breathing, so much so that Jack and Eileen decided he needed to be rushed to the hospital. Before they could get there for help, however, he stopped breathing. Eileen hoped that the hospital could revive him, but that was not to be. He had died in his mother's loving arms on the way. Bryce is buried at San Fernando Mission Cemetery in California. 5 years later, the family moved to a little town called Victor, Montana, where Eileen's brother Dale and his family lived. Jack and Eileen bought a sweet little farm, which they loved, but where they struggled to make a living for 2 years. There are stories of Eileen and Fernie chasing escaped pigs, of Shane getting left behind at the farm one Sunday when everybody else departed for church, of the downtown Victor 4th of July parades, of an ambitious chimney building project, and of tremendous fun when the cousins from California came for summer break. However, that farm and all Jack and Eileen's hard work couldn't make ends meet, so they sold the place and moved back to California to this home on Fallon Street in Lakewood. 12 years after that, the family moved to Wilder, Idaho, a place in the country with 2 acres to accommodate all the horse riding and canal swimming and Easter egg hunting that the kids could want. When they arrived at the place, Eileen announced, "This is my last move," and she has held true to that promise. She has been in that house 45 years. Not long after settling in Idaho, Eileen decided she'd been a stay-at-home mom long enough. She took a job in Sears' catalog department in Caldwell. She met so many people there and enjoyed helping people with their orders. She was also one of her best customers. Eileen has enjoyed not living in the city and being able to grow a garden. Her tomatoes are locally legendary, and this pumpkin picture speaks volumes as well. It hasn't all been peace and tranquility by any means, and other tragedy has marked the years in Idaho. Glenn was just 23 when he died in a car accident. A year prior to that, Brett was very seriously injured in a bad motorcycle wreck. After months of hospitalization and many series of rehabilitations, he was dismissed to return home as a paraplegic and was told he would never walk again. His determination and the unstinting faith and assistance of his mother Eileen led to his learning how to walk again and living a full life as a highly productive citizen. J.B. barely escaped an awful vehicle accident when he went off the road and down an embankment on Lolo Pass. At age 50, Eileen made a big career change. Good friend Lloyd Putney convinced her to take a job as a rural mail carrier. Neither rain nor hail nor sleet nor snow kept her from her appointed rounds for the next 15 years. She retired at age 65. It has been a major challenge for the people putting together this program to get a count of how many grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren Eileen currently has. The number seems to change quickly, but we think that as of today, that number is 12 children, 43 grandchildren, 57 great-grandchildren, and 5 great-great-grandchildren. Here's a little sampling of how the tribe had multiplied by 1998, and a lot has happened in the intervening 20 years. We have other picture presentations coming up, but this concludes the story of Eileen Cunningham Hotchkiss, the first 90 years. We hope you enjoyed it.